Sometimes, when night falls and the world seems peaceful, shadows reveal themselves in the unlikeliest of places. In the high deserts of the San Luis Valley, a pair of unsuspecting movers find themselves haunted by eerie lights and watchers in the darkness. Out on Montauk's abandoned military base, an old radar tower hums with electric secrets, and something half-glimpsed skitters at the edge of sight. And on Florida's Tamiami Trail, a silent figure, winged, impossibly large, swoops across a traveler's path, leaving only questions in its wake. 3 stories, 3 corners of America, each tinged with mystery and dread, each wondering the same thing. How well do we really know the roads we travel after sundown? Step into the abyss and welcome to Weird Encounters, a place where the ordinary fades into shadow and the unexplainable comes alive. Make sure you hit the like button, subscribe, and join our ever-growing community of the curious. Your support is the lifeblood that keeps this channel alive. Now, prepare yourself, for what you're about to witness is not for the faint of heart. There are stories that slip through the cracks of our everyday chatter, tales whispered in hushed tones and shared only under the safety of darkness. You never quite expect they'll happen to you until one day, in the quiet hush of a wide-open stretch of land, something shows up that refuses to be ignored. Let me set the stage for you. This happened in the San Luis Valley in southern Colorado, where Colorado, New Mexico, and the horizon all seemed to blur. It was late September 2019, right before those early frosts start to settle in. I remember the time well because I was in town helping a friend move some of his equipment from an abandoned family farm near Hooper. The place is known for sightings, UFO sightings, cryptid sightings, cattle mutilations, you name it. I've been hearing stories since I was a teenager, and to be frank, they always rolled off me like bedtime stories. But I can't quite do that anymore. We were winding down a long day, hauling stuff in and out, making multiple trips along County Road 17. Honestly, the first day was uneventful. Just a big open sky, the dust kicking up behind the truck tires. That night, we heard coyotes, which was normal, but there was this weird echo that followed them. Almost like there was a second pack howling back, but in a deeper register. Guttural, if that makes sense. It didn't rattle me then. I just thought maybe it was the echo across the valley or something. The second night was when the thing started to feel wrong. My friend's old farmhouse is half collapsed, and we were using flashlights to poke around for anything salvageable. No electricity out there. Sometime around 10 p.m., I got this overwhelming feeling that I was being watched, like that prickly feeling on the back of your neck. I turned around, and across the field, I spotted movement. It was low to the ground, but taller than a coyote. I tried to rationalize. Maybe it's just a deer. They come down from the Rio Grande National Forest sometimes. But the shape wasn't right. It was more elongated with a hunched back. I remember thinking, could it be a bear, rummaging around for scraps? I almost hoped it was, but there was something off about how it moved. Too smooth, almost liquid. No bobbing up and down. It looked like it was gliding rather than walking. I thought it was my imagination at first. I told my friend, "Hey, I think there's some critter out here." He didn't say much, but we both decided it was best to head back to the truck. On our third trip, we were about to load one last piece of furniture when we heard this knocking sound, like a thick branch hitting an old fence post. But there were no trees in that immediate area, just scrub and open fields. I froze because I'd read enough weird stories about the valley to know wood knocks sometimes get associated with Bigfoot sightings. It seemed ridiculous to me, yet there we were, hearing a thump, thump, thump out in the dark. I don't think I've ever felt such an urge to run. My friend muttered something about the Watchers, He has family ties to the region, and they talk about watchers in hushed voices. No one's ever explained who or what they are, only that they've been around longer than memory. Now, here's a tangent that might be relevant. My friend's father was apparently part of a hush-hush government surveying team in the early 80s. You know how the stories go. He'd come home from the Crestone area, talking about how the government was supposedly studying strange aerial phenomena. Something about magnetic anomalies off the charts near the Great Sand Dunes. All I know is that he used to say, "There are places people aren't meant to go poking around, so maybe this farmland is near one of those spots." We decided to wrap up for the night. The next morning, I went back alone. I was finishing up the last bits of the move. You might think that was crazy, but I was determined to get it all done. The day was clear, sky so blue, it felt unreal. About midday, I heard this low hum. It was so faint, I almost mistook it for a plane overhead, but there was nothing in the sky. It lasted maybe 30 seconds. Then silence, followed by two large booms in the distance, like sonic booms. But not from any jet that I saw. It reminded me of that weird phenomenon people sometimes call skyquakes. Later, as I was heading back to the truck with the final load, a car pulled up along the road. An older man rolled down his window. He didn't introduce himself, just asked if I saw anything unusual the night before. I told him I didn't know what he was talking about. He gave me this look, hard to describe, maybe disappointment or resignation, and he said, "We all see them eventually." Then he drove off. I spent a long time trying to figure out who he was. Rancher? Local caretaker? Or someone else entirely? He wore no uniform, and the SUV had no plates that I could see, which was bizarre. I called my friend about it, but he wasn't surprised. He just said, "Happens sometimes," as if that explained everything. That night, I left the farm and drove back toward Alamosa. The sun was nearly set, and you know that time of day, everything's got a strange glow. As I looked in my rearview mirror, I swear I saw a figure standing near the side of the road. Tall, too tall for a normal person, with a narrow, elongated head. It was just standing there, not moving. I tried to rationalize that it might be a telephone pole or something. But telephone poles don't vanish the moment you blink. And it did. Just gone. I've heard of so many cryptid and paranormal accounts in the San Luis Valley, UFO sightings, weird lights in the sky, water disappearing from stock tanks without explanation, and even rumored government vehicles lurking around. I used to brush them off as local legends. But now, it's like I have more questions than answers. I can't shake this feeling that something old and strange roams this valley, and whatever it is, it's comfortable enough out there to show up to people who aren't even trying to see it. I think the more people talk about this, the less power these entities, or whatever they are, have to stay in the shadows. I hope this spurs some real conversation about what's lurking in the San Luis Valley. And so, amid the quiet expanse of an all-too-familiar valley, we're left to wonder what really walks between the rows of abandoned farms and the muted highways at dusk. It's a tale that beckons us to look a little closer, to keep our eyes wide open, if we dare, and to ask ourselves how many mysteries we pass by each day, unseeing in the fading twilight. What happens when the remnants of secrecy and experimentation linger long after official records say they don't exist? Sometimes a faint whisper of something. Sometimes the cracks of abandoned bunkers and battered shorelines. It beckons even the most doubtful among us to look. And maybe looking a little too closely is dangerous. This all happened near Camp Hero State Park in Montauk, New York, the old military base at the tip of Long Island that's famous for all sorts of conspiracy theories. People talk about the Montauk Project, about hidden tunnels, about experiments with time travel, mind control, you name it. I used to laugh it off as local lore, the kind of wild rumor that keeps tourists intrigued. But after my experience, I'm not so sure what's myth and what's terrifying reality. This started late one evening in August 2021. I was with a friend, he lives in Amagansett, and we decided to drive out to the Montauk Lighthouse around sunset, mostly because we wanted to see that classic view. We ended up sticking around after dark, which in hindsight might have been a bad idea. The place was mostly empty, except for a few fishermen along the shore. Everything felt normal until we heard a low mechanical hum coming from inland, like a generator or a substation powering on. There's that old radar tower in the park, so I assumed maybe they were running some maintenance routine. But then the hum turned into a throbbing vibration under my feet, as if the ground itself was gently pulsing. It was subtle, but definitely there. We walked toward the perimeter fence of the old base, looking for a source. My friend mumbled something about hearing rumors that the radar dish would sometimes spin on its own at odd hours. We didn't see anything move, but we both felt it, like a faint electricity in the air. I've been around large power stations before, but this was different. It felt alive, almost, if that makes sense. Later that same night, around 10 p.m., we decided we'd had enough weirdness and started making our way back to the car. That's when we noticed movement near one of the smaller, out-of-service bunkers. The place is off limits, with signs posted all over telling people to stay away. There was a shape in the dark, tall and thin but hunched forward. We stopped to watch. It seemed to glide along the chain-link fence, not quite an animal, not quite a person either. I couldn't make out any details except for a weird reflection in its eyes, or maybe from something on its head. It was too dark to be certain. We were about to call out when it disappeared behind a concrete corner. For a moment I told myself it was a deer or a trick of the shadows. But then the hum started again, louder this time, almost rhythmic. A moment later, a bright flash lit up behind the bunkers, like a sudden burst of white light that didn't make a sound. It was almost like lightning, except there wasn't a single cloud in the sky. And the flash didn't seem to come from above. It was more localized, like a strobe hidden in the depths of that old installation. We pretty much ran back to the car after that. My friend said something about, "It's just the old base acting up." Like he'd heard stories from locals who claimed the government still runs covert experiments there. He repeated some anecdote about men in black suits patrolling the park at night. I tried to forget it, but the next day, I found myself poking around for any news about unusual activity at Camp Hero. I got nothing official, but the usual rumors popped up on message boards. Missing pets, sightings of bizarre creatures near the beach, sporadic power outages that no one at the local electric company would address. Over the following weeks, I couldn't shake the sense that something was off. I came back on my own late September, this time mid-afternoon. I wanted to see if anything looked out of place. A park ranger approached me and casually asked if I was looking for the tower. I said I was just a curious tourist. He nodded but didn't look convinced. He mentioned that certain sections of the park close early for public safety reasons, cliff erosion and all that. Yet he was eyeing me like I was about to stumble across something I shouldn't. When I asked about the radar tower being operational, he just said something about it being decommissioned and sealed, then walked off, leaving me more suspicious than reassured. Here's something else. I had a conversation with an older fisherman near Fort Pond Bay one morning after the initial incident. He recalled hearing about a local who vanished back in the 70s under mysterious circumstances, rumored to have been pulled in by something underground near Camp Hero. No formal record, no missing persons case that made headlines, just a story told among locals. There's always a possibility it's just an urban legend. But with everything else going on, it gnawed at me. A few weeks later, I visited my sister in Riverhead and mentioned my weird experiences in passing. She said that every so often people claim to see strange lights or silhouettes around the area of Montauk, usually late at night when the park is supposed to be closed. She heard from a co-worker that occasionally black SUVs with tinted windows show up with no insignia, no license plates. They glide around town, then vanish as quickly as they appear. I get that it all sounds so conspiratorial, but I can't ignore the humming, the flash of light, and that inhuman shape slinking near the bunker. It still haunts me. The rational part of me wants to believe we just spooked ourselves, or maybe came across some secret filming project or leftover technology tests. But I can't prove anything, and the official stance is always that Camp Hero is just another old base turned into a state park. Right. Anyway, that's the bulk of it. Maybe someone has experienced similar things, or they know someone with a story that lines up. I don't expect any definitive answers, but at least I'm not alone in wondering what's really going on inside those old bunkers. So, was it nothing more than an overactive mind nudged along by campfire stories? Or is the old Montauk base a relic of a past that refuses to stay buried? An echo of something still humming just beneath the surface of everyday life. Sometimes, a lonely stretch of highway hides more than the occasional hitchhiker or stray alligator. Every so often, a traveler stumbles onto something so startling, so unexplainable, it lingers in the mind like a fever dream, long after the headlights have faded. Listen closely, as this story will send chills down your spine. I've been debating for weeks whether to send this, because it still leaves me a bit shaken even just typing it out. But I figured your YouTube channel might at least appreciate hearing about the strange things that sometimes happen out here, where the pavement of the Tamiami Trail runs through the Everglades. This happened on December 5th, 2022, a Monday night that should have been uneventful. I'd driven down from Fort Myers to check out a property near Ochapee, Florida, a small place, best known for having the smallest post office in the country. I'm a real estate photographer, so I had my camera gear with me, hoping to snag some daytime shots of the wetlands. The trip took longer than planned, though, thanks to some heavy traffic around Naples. By the time I reached that long, empty stretch of the Tamiami Trail, the sun had already dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky a deep orange that faded fast into twilight. I stopped near a pull-off close to the Big Cypress National Preserve. It was around 7:30 p.m. when I got out of my car to stretch my legs. This is a place where the croaking frogs and the buzzing insects form a kind of eerie symphony. The air felt thick, and every breeze carried the scent of swamp. As I was standing there, I thought I saw something move in the distance, on the edge of my vision, a silhouette gliding low above the reeds. At first, I assumed it was a large heron or maybe an ibis, but it seemed too big. Not huge like a plane or anything, but bigger than any bird I know around here. I didn't think much of it until I heard a sound that I can only describe as a low, guttural whoosh. It made the hairs on my arms stand straight. I got back in the car, figuring I might be spooking myself. I started to drive east again, following the trail. There was only occasional traffic, a few headlights here and there, but mostly I felt alone. Maybe 10 minutes later, up ahead on the right side of the road, I caught a glimpse of what I thought was a man standing. Oddly tall, maybe 6 or 7 feet from what I could tell in the headlights. But there was something wrong with how it seemed to stand, as though it was hunched forward and balancing on the balls of its feet. Then, in the span of a second, it extended these enormous dark shapes from its sides. Wings, I guess. Before I had time to blink, it shot upward, crossing the road about 20 feet in front of my car. The entire thing happened so fast, yet in that flash, I swear I saw a kind of pale, leathery texture on the underside of those wings. I braked hard, my heart pounding. I sat there with the engine idling and the hazard lights on, trying to make sense of it. I've driven through the glades more times than I can count, and I've seen Florida panthers, snakes, all sorts of birds, but never anything remotely like that. I remember feeling this uneasy sense that I shouldn't linger, like if I stayed too long, I'd see it again, and maybe I didn't want that. Eventually, I kept going. When I reached a small roadside convenience store near Monroe Station, or what's left of it, there's just a marker now, I pulled over to gather my wits. The place was closed, so I just stood by my car. A battered old pickup pulled in eventually, and this older gentleman waved politely, more out of courtesy than curiosity. He glanced at me, and I tried asking if he'd seen anything strange on the road tonight. He sort of smirked and mentioned that folks around here sometimes talk about sightings of big birds or bat-like shadows. He didn't elaborate, just said local stories go way back. He mentioned that sometimes men in official-looking uniforms show up asking questions about sightings. That felt odd, and I got the sense he didn't want to discuss it too much. For the next few days, I couldn't stop replaying that moment in my head. I recalled reading about sightings of giant, winged humanoid creatures in other parts of the country. Some folks call them Mothman or winged weirdos, but I never heard of them specifically in the Everglades. But if you're going to hide something weird, the Everglades is a pretty good place. There's miles of swampy backcountry, peppered with old Native American legends of shape-shifting spirits and mysterious illusions. I started asking around quietly, but got nothing concrete. Some fishermen along the Turner River said they'd heard stories of something that could almost pass as a huge crane until you catch it at the right angle. Another claimed it was just local lore to scare off tourists, but I noticed a pattern. Whenever I pressed for details, folks would clam up or change the subject. It gave me that uneasy feeling that maybe there are more sightings out here than anyone lets on, and no one wants the trouble that comes with reporting it. I don't know if what I saw was some unknown species of bird, a freak one-time sighting, or something else entirely. The size, though, that's what bothers me the most. I've seen big birds, trust me. This was more than that. It moved with an almost human intelligence, like it knew I was there and decided it was time to vanish. The motion, the speed, it was unreal. I've driven through that route twice since, and every time I do, I feel a knot of anxiety. I find myself scanning the tree line, the roadside, half hoping I don't see anything like that again. Sometimes I wonder if I should have tried to film it, but in the moment, you freeze. You don't think logically about pulling out a phone or setting up a camera. You just react. Anyway, I know this sounds out there. I'm sending it in the hope someone else has had a similar experience or can offer some explanation. Or maybe folks who've had run-ins with winged humanoids in other parts of the country will see this and feel less alone. This place is full of secrets. Some are just bigger, darker, and more unsettling than the rest. Maybe it'll stir up some conversation or lead to some answers. Thanks for giving me a space to share. And so, on a lonesome highway in the Florida Everglades, one man glimpses something he can't quite name, a silent reminder that sometimes when the sun goes down, the shadows take wing and leave behind more questions than answers. My dear watchers, your presence is a gift. Thank you for your time, your curiosity, your courage. But remember, there are others who wander, unaware of the dangers that await. By liking this video and subscribing, you offer them a light in the darkness. Support our channel and keep the stories coming, simply by giving a thumbs up and subscribing and sharing.